Hello and welcome to the Knock On KCLR and scoreline.ie's weekly rugby podcast. Today we're talking to James Blanchfield. He's the PRO of Kilkenny Rugby Club, former player as well. James, how are you?
Good, thanks, Stephen. And you?
Sure, I'm not too bad. I'm not too bad at all. James, we're going to talk about a lot of things, of course, centering in on Kilkenny Rugby Club as well. I suppose I talk about this with everyone, and we probably will for another while anyway with people, but hasn't it been a crazy year, particularly for rugby and sport? Even the provincial competitions, the Six Nations, all that sort of crack. It's been a bit mad.
It's been mental, yeah. If we had sat down in a room 18 months ago and said, this is where we're going to be now in 18 months' time, I think everyone would have said, you're crackers, But look, it is what it is. We've come this far with it. It's made a mess of sport and everything, be it soccer, hurling, rugby. We're all sport people, we're all sports mad people. We just want to get back into games. For me, the bit of interest has nearly gone out of it because I can't go to a match. It's grand watching the interprovincial or the provincial games on telly and whatnot, but you want to be there as well, and have a chat with the lad on the street outside of it after and ask him what did he think of it. And, you can't do that. You can't go for a pint after it, or as the fellow says, talk to BS at the high counter while watching it, So fingers crossed, come the middle of the summer, July, August, September, we'll be mooching a little bit back into normality.
Absolutely. Kilkenny Rugby Club, like all of them across the country, and that would have been hit hard enough as well. And not even from a financial point of view. I mean, the rugby took a fair big hit. Like, we know that the club GAA championships came back and did a lot of that last year. But in terms of the Leinster League, all that sort of stuff, that really went by the wayside for local rugby clubs. That was tough.
It was really tough. And I tell you what, for us particularly, because we felt last year was our year. Might be big talk or might be bigging the lads up, but David O'Connor and Ray Pembroke had pulled together a squad that was going to really compete in that league and compete at the top. We beat Ashbourne in the first day out, who have been our nemesis since 2012. They've constantly beaten us, and anytime we seem to have an upper hand on them, they just pinch us at the post in the last 2 or 3 minutes of a game. And this year we beat them in an absolute cracking game out in Folkestone. I mean, it was a cracking game. And we went toe-to-toe with them. And as what's after happening now is kind of that squad, that team nearly has been lost. There's lads gone travelling, there's lads gone to work, they're not available. So, that was a big issue. That's probably going to be a big issue for us coming into next season, is we probably try to need to source a few players. For instance, Tim Corkery's older brother, Hugh, he's been playing down with UL Bows for the last 4 years. He came back to us this year. He was starting number 13. With the first for the South East League and the first Leinster League game, and season was stopped, and we believe now he's going away next year working overseas, so we're going to lose him. So look, they're the cards you're dealt. You have to take it. But look, we really felt first and seconds that last year was a season that would have been a successful season for us. The first won the South East League, seconds won the South East League. Everything was moving in the right direction. But look, you just have to, as I said, play the cards you're dealt.
Yeah, and you had Doc looking after the team there as well. And really, there was a lot of intent there. I remember interviewing him before, I think it was early last year, before the pandemic started, so to speak, and there was a lot of intent, and you could hear, like what you were talking about, the bit of excitement going in that Leinster League and everything like that, and then bang, so your players basically are sort of rebuilding your junior teams from scratch. Well, not from scratch, but yeah.
You are certainly rebuilding them from scratch, and it's kind of hard for, I suppose, Kilkenny, and kind of don't want to play the poor mouth, but there's no third level in Kilkenny, and players go to third level and they tend to play rugby where they're studying, because they can get a few bob off a senior club or something like that. So we are losing them. There's a high turnover every year of youth players leaving and then older players coming back. But just on Doc there, Doc has made some unbelievable changes to how we operate as a club. Like, he's not just a coach of a team. He has huge kind of respect within the club. And he brings that element of excitement, as you said, Stephen, to what everybody is doing. And people, because he was such a good player and such a good captain for the club, people respect him, and he was an incredible captain for the club. And people respect him, and people kind of, how would you say, retired players who played with Dave when he made his first bout with the first team, probably back in about 2005 or 6. older guys like Dinny Brennan and Neil Campion and Pat Holden, they'd all really respect him and would nearly come out to support the team just because of him, or if there was a little bit of help needed, they'd come and give him that, So Dave has been immense for the club. We just hope that he kind of sticks with us for the long term, because young coaches like Dave, they're really ambitious guys, and they are in hot demand, like with bigger senior clubs,
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the story out of the club now? Are the boys back training? What's the latest, I suppose? Looking ahead, I suppose, to the next Southeast League later in August, I presume.
Yeah, well, they've been back training for the last 4 weeks, and in fairness, there's been really, really good numbers at training. They've had kind of, how would you say, about 30 training every night, so just breaking them off into the kind of into the groups within the restrictions, and they're playing a lot of games, just conditioning games and stuff like that. And I went out a couple of times to look at it. There's a really good atmosphere there. There's good numbers, and usually kind of off-season training, pre-season, it's dominated by younger players. Lads who are making the transition from under 18 into adult rugby, and they try to go out early and make an impression. But this year, it's all kind of, how would you say, established first and second players that are making up the numbers of training, with a couple of youth players then coming in. So look, it's really good. The Southeast League is on the cards, but also there's a Leinster Cup being played as well. It's kind of, how would I say, a segue competition to kind of get teams into competitive rugby earlier. So that is kicking off. I think we're playing Monkstown in Sydney Parade, or Rodney Parade, on the middle of August. So that's the first game. That's the first game that's on the schedule. We're looking forward. So we're looking forward to that. I heard Dave the other night actually out of training, kind of telling the lads that's the objective, that's the target. So they've been back training for the last 4 weeks. I think tonight is actually their last session, because I think the season needs to be officially finished by the end of May for insurance purposes. So then I think they're finishing up tonight with their last session of the year, and then I think they're back training in or around the first week of July, and then they'll be building for that Monkstown game from then. And really we'll probably try and blood a few lads and get a few new players in as well, and then after that it's probably into Southeast and then into Leinster League. Now, I'm not sure, but I think the Southeast League is going to hold a little bit more clout this year. That has been a bit of an issue for the last few years, that clubs aren't taking it seriously. But now I think there was a proposal put forward by the North Midlands branch that the winners of the respective area leagues will go into a round robin playoff, and the winners then, the outright winners of that competition will qualify for the All Ireland Junior Cup.
Oh.
So yeah, so I think annually it's 3, maybe 4 teams from each province going to the All Ireland Junior Cup, and traditionally they qualify for that based on where they come in, where they finish in the league. But I think is what Leinster are doing this year is they're cutting that back to 3, and then the winner of the overall area competition will qualify as well. So that's good. It kind of gives the regional leagues a little bit more clout,
It does. It adds a bit of spice to it as well.
Yeah, and look, I don't know if that motion was passed, but I know it was certainly being proposed anyway. But if it does, it'd be brilliant.
Yeah, and like you were saying, I was just thinking about it when you said that you have to wrap up your season. It just sounds funny to say, well, we have to wrap it up and start it again, when you're only back. But I totally understand the insurance point of view as well. And if you did have the lads training all summer, by the time you hit the Towns Cup next year, it could be a bit weird.
Maybe well worn out, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lads would be sick of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's the point. That's the point about rugby, and it's one of the things I enjoyed about rugby is that you're given your schedule at the start of the season, and that's your schedule, and I'm going to have 4 weeks where I'm playing a match. I have a weekend off there. I can plan to go out with the lads for a few pints, or I can go away with the family for a weekend or do something like that. The season, it has a defined start and a defined finish, which is great from a player's perspective, and it gives you certainty. And then there's always a few floating weekends built into it as well, So,
did you lads that love that sort of organisation?
Yeah, well, in fairness, they would, And look, I packed in hurling many, many years ago, and it was one of my bugbears is that kind of, you didn't know on a Monday until the Kilkenny people came out on a Wednesday if you had a game or not that weekend, But I won't say I was ever any good at hurling now or anything like that, but certainly I know a lot of hurlers who would like that level of certainty,
Yeah, so so training is wrapping up, but there is going to be action out in Kilkenny Rugby Club out in Folkestown during the summer. Tag Rugby is coming back. He's had a very successful Tag Rugby tournaments going back a number of years now.
We have. I think Tag is going back to Mick McGrath started, I think, in about 2005. And every year there's just been a brilliant pickup on it. Like people seem to love it. Like, and there's people come out there. Like, there's teams go training and everything for it. We had to call it off last year, obviously, and we kind of said around Christmas, will we run Tag Rugby again? And we kind of said, yeah, we'll give it a go. And then Stevie Ashmore was running it. Stevie then kind of said, well, look, he's not going to have time this year because he's after setting up his own sports performance business, and he is working with a few GAA teams on that. So that was his time gone. So a few other kind of younger members came forward, like Ciara O'Dwyer, Sean Flynn, Gary Doyle, and Liam Caddy. And they kind of came forward and said, look, we'll run it. So they're running it now. So entries are open. It's starting tomorrow, or starting today, apologies, and the 10th. And is what at the moment, I think there's a couple of places left, not many, but if teams want to join, it doesn't matter if you missed the first week, you can still enter and come out next week. It's going to run for 12 weeks on I think Thursdays and Fridays. There's going to be 2 Fridays in it as well. And that'll bring a hive of activity. And you know what? People will probably be cautious, Stephen, as well, about kind of coming back out and kind of gathering in groups. But it is outdoors. It's fast paced. There's going to, like, one of the bad things is there's going to be very little hanging around like previous years. Like, there was kind of a great atmosphere around it previously, where people kind of hung around the ground and maybe had a couple of bottles and got a lift home.
Bit of barbecue.
See if we can do it. Yeah, exactly. Bit of a barbecue. We have to see if we can do that as well, But immense credit to the 4 guys for stepping up and taking it on, and immense credit to Steve Ashmore for his work on it as well for the last 3 years. And everybody, it's just it's a bit of crack,
It surely is. I played Tag Rugby for many years and started with Tullow and then into Carlow Rugby Club, a very successful tournament there for a while. It is the best of crack. Even for some people, it was a small little feeder for the women's team and the men's team. Some lads played a bit of Tag Rugby, never played rugby before, got a taste for the next thing they're playing, J3 or J2.
Yeah, we actually picked up a few players over the years through it as well, like lads who came to Kilkenny and were working in a place who were rugby players. Then they came out to the club and you could kind of see a lad, you know a fella who had a bit of ball about him, who played before, he'd have the basics that others wouldn't, and you could kind of say, well, that lad played rugby before, and you'd ring Steve Ashmore or Dave O'Connor and say, hey, you need to come out here now and tap up this fella. He's living in Kilkenny, he's working in Taxback, or he's working in Modulville or somewhere like that. Go get him. And, we've picked up a few players over the years through that as well.
Yeah, it was a great feeder in Carlow for the ladies rugby team, the Coyotes, back in the day. That it was formed, I think, off the back of that. I know what you mean. The Tag Rugby is great. It's non-contact. We're meant to be.
That's it. And there's no contracts given out. You just go out there and have the crack. And I tell you, I've seen the competition in it is unbelievable. Like, when you go out, it's social, like, and you can see people, they're grinding their teeth at one another. And they're kind of going, what's going on here? Like, as a referee, you kind of have to say, hey, come here now, you just calm down.
Calm down, lads. It's the summer, chill out.
as I often say to lads who get a little bit overzealous when I'm refereeing a game, I said, right, if you want to carry on like that, come out here in October on a Tuesday, Thursday night, and we'll see how much of a big hard man you are,
Yeah, come out and train when there's frost on the ground.
That's it, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you'll learn a lot from that, I tell you. So that's the Tag Rugby tournament. That's great to have that for 12 weeks. There's one thing I wanted to ask you about is, we spoke about your men's team there as well. You had a successful women's team there, but there hasn't been, I suppose, much going on that front over the last few years. What's the story there, James?
Yeah, that's been like women's rugby. It goes back a long time in Kilkenny. I think we were probably one of the first local teams in the southeast to actually have a rugby team. If I remember correctly, it was Danny McAvoy, a stalwart of the club, and Lee Selman were approached by a few girls, Willie Duggan's 2 daughters, a couple of the Comerford sisters from Thomastown, Kate Hennessy, and all these girls. I said, Caroline Mahan, actually, they're all kind of saying, well, look, we want to play rugby, will he facilitate us? And they all kind of came from rugby families, so they would have grown up at rugby. And the lads said, absolutely, if you want to get going, we'll get going. And that particular team, they went on for a number of years, and then they all kind of went their separate ways. Girls moved to Dublin, girls moved abroad, so it fell asunder. But probably I'd say in around 2006, Patrick McCorry and Richard Byrne kind of got it back up and running. Again, likewise with the previous team, they were approached by a few players who wanted to start playing again. So the lads went out and played them, and they went on really well. And you know, they had a lot of success. They produced an awful lot of very, very good rugby players. Girls like, you know, Mags Hennessy, Kate Hennessy, all these kind of girls, and they played a lot of rugby, and some of them are still involved. But then, sadly, about 4 years ago, kind of that team dispersed again. And as a club, we probably put our hands up and admitted our fault that we didn't give the girls' game enough of attention at underage levels. And Gary Brickell was the president at the time, and he moved it over to Patrick Tracy. And the committee kind of put an objective in place. Well, let's go back to grassroots and let's start the underage girls again. Let's get it going from, say, shall we say, under 14 up to under 18, and get it going at minis level. So now, last year, we were at a point where, for the first time in the club's history, we had an under 14, under 16, and 18 girls teams fielding on the same day. Now, they were fully self-sufficient. There was no overlapping players in any teams. So kind of Peter Hart, Derek Lawler, Mary Louise Brody, and these guys putting in the hard yards with them to bring them on and be there as coaches. But then the other really positive side of it is that on minis level, there's up to 50, 60, 70 girls out in the club on a Sunday morning playing minis rugby, which is really, really encouraging, you know. And then at the far end of the ladder, you have, I suppose, the adult girls and the adult women who are there, and Mags Hennessy and Rhodey Curran, they're working away, just keeping those girls, keeping them in training, giving them a couple of challenge matches a year. They might enter the cup. They're not in the league yet, but the point is that a lot of the girls coming through from under 18 from this year, they're a very good team, and they're going to kind of feed into the women's team for next season. So fingers crossed, it won't be long before we have an adult women's team back fielding every Sunday in the club, you know. I need to actually say that Alice Brennan from our under 18 team has been picked on the Leinster under 18 girls squad. So you know, that's really good. Like, you know, 4 girls were sent up for trials, and Alice has been picked. I think she's a loose head prop. But kind of ironically, her mother has been a stalwart, Mary Broderick. She has been a stalwart of women's rugby in Kilkenny for years and years and years. You know, she played. She was the life and soul of it. And Mary was kind of the gel that brought the women's rugby together for years as well. So, you know, it's great to see her daughter now stepping up and moving on. And fingers crossed, she can forge a bit of a career out of rugby as well. You know, absolutely. And you can see it as well nationally. Like, the women's game is buzzing. Like, you know, you can watch it on the telly there when they played the Six Nations a few weeks ago. They're doing really well, and girls like Bevan Parsons, you know, they're poster girls for rugby. So hopefully it can move on now, and we can get it back, you know.
Absolutely, that's the thing. It's great to see more publicity, and I suppose even from the bigger media companies televising the Women's Six Nations, and that the quality, the games, everything has gone up. The marketing is getting better. But like you said, when the girls, the couple of hundred girls or whatever out in Kilkenny Rugby Club Fookstown on a Sunday morning see that, you know, only good things can come out of it as well. It's great. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, absolutely.
And they're an integral part of the club, like of any club, you know. And it's kind of, for too long, rugby has been male dominated. You know, it is a game for everybody in all shapes and sizes. Absolutely.
Tag rugby is testament to that as well.
Yeah, indeed.
It doesn't matter what age you are or what size you are or whatever it is, how fast or slow you are, anyone can play tag rugby. If you're interested, get in touch with James and the lads out in Kilkenny. The tournament is getting underway, but like you said, there might be spaces left there for me as well.
Or if anybody wants, like, teams are always short. If anyone wants to come out and play, you know, come out. You'll have to contact the team. Just with COVID restrictions, we have to register everybody. But, you know, come out and play.
Yeah, and the great thing about tag rugby for people that are listening that don't realise is that you can sub on and sub off as you like. So you don't have to play the full match if you're wrecked. Like, if it's a really hot sunny day, you're like, you can go, come on for me.
You know, we have a stalwart of tag rugby in Kilkenny. His name is Tristan Linus. Tristan is the sort of lad, you know, he'll get a ball and he'll make an out, belt up the wing for about 50 yards, pass on the ball and turn around, and someone come on for me here, you know, I'm done for a few minutes, I need a break.
My lungs are gone. Somebody help me. That's it. And speaking about having people blazing trails, I suppose, for Kilkenny Rugby Club, we'll talk about Willie Duggan, Gary Halpen, all those sort of people now later on in the interview. But Tim Corkery is flying it. He got capped for the Leinster senior team this year over in Italy. He was playing last weekend for the Leinster A team against the Irish underage and that as well. Tim is flying it. And another product of Kilkenny Rugby Club, which is great.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Tim is an old head on young shoulders. He's like, for anyone, I don't know Tim very well, but he's a really quiet guy, and he's like a sponge. He's just always taking advice in, always listening, always watching, and looking to improve. And one of the funny things is, and as I said it to you recently, Tim was coached by his mother the whole way through from being underage. Mary Louise, who I mentioned earlier on, like, she's really, really good coach. But I don't think many guys who have gotten to the level that Tim has gotten to can say has that unique kind of feat of being coached by their mum from the day they started rugby to the day they finished youth rugby with the club. And he was coached by Mick McGrath, Barry Daly, and Lee as well. But everything that Tim has achieved so far on the rugby pitch, he's achieved himself by constantly looking to improve and going about his business nice and quietly. He was in a pickle there a couple of years ago when he was an underage minor hurler as well. That he had an option of being a county minor, and he went away and he made the hard decision himself. Like, nobody was in his ear. Nobody put pressure on him to pick rugby over hurling. He went away and made that decision himself, which for any young fella from Kilkenny is a tough decision to make, because the draw of being a county minor hurler is massive, but he made that decision himself. And at the time, a lot of people probably thought he was stone mad, but it's paying off now. He's in the Leinster setup. I think he has 2 caps for 2, if not 3 caps for the Leinster for the Leinster first side.
Yeah.
He's there with the Irish under-21s or Irish under-20s. He was playing against the Irish under-20s with Leinster A last week. He's on the bench for the Irish under-20s tomorrow against Munster A. So we have big hopes for Tim in the club, but but there's no pressure on him either, from the club either, because everything he'll do, he'll earn himself, And I suppose one of the tough things on him is the depth charts for number 10 in Leinster is phenomenal, So, when he gets to the end of his development contract, whatever he's on, or if he does get a development contract, it's going to be a tough road for him at Leinster, and maybe he might have to move on to get a bit of game time in years to come. But look, we're all rooting for him. And again, it's another product from the southeast, Sean O'Brien, you had the boys, the Byrnes from Carlow, Tom Daly up in Connacht, the boy from Corry over in Connacht as well. Like, Southeast clubs are producing some serious players at the moment. Tig as well, actually. Yeah, let's not forget Tig, the New Ross boys. But the Southeast clubs are producing players, at youth level, more than the other regions are. And you compare that back to the work that's been done by the CCROs and YDOs like Decky O'Brien, Corey Carty, our own man at Kilkenny, Ben Devlin, and also our coaches as well at club level. So, the big thing is as well that it kind of goes to show other young fellas locally that, if I focus on it and give it the time it needs, I could end up there as well, But look, back to the point, Tim is a phenomenal young fella. We're all so pleased for him. We have immense pride in him. He's the first Kilkenny man, I think, since the late 90s with Pat Holden to actually play first for Leinster. So look, at fingers crossed, anything he achieves, we'll be happy for him. We're already delighted for him, and if he achieves nothing else after that, well, so be it. But what he's achieved to date has been remarkable.
It surely has. He's a good chap, and a lot about you were talking about the depth chart at under 10s, at number 10. It's all, a lot of it is down to luck. If Johnny Sexton moves on and Ross Byrne decides to go to Connacht for argument's sake, or whatever it is, there's always opportunities there, and a lot of it is luck. We interviewed Ed Byrne and Tom Daly recently on this podcast, and they said luck is a lot of it as well. And Tom Daly got lucky doing injury cover across in the West with Connacht, and now he played 15 games, started 15 games for Connacht.
He's had an incredible season. I think he has to get game time against Japan and the USA this summer. I think he has.
Yeah. He's on the fringes, he said. Anyway, he got a call from Andy Farrell ahead of the last Six Nations and that. So yeah,
because he's big and robust. Like he's actually much more physical and bigger when you see him in the flesh than actually he comes across in the head. Like he's a robust centre, like, you know.
He is, absolutely. And speaking of legends of Kilkenny Rugby Club as well, we need to talk about Willie Duggan. The Lions tour is coming up. Willie was a Lion, of course, himself, a legend of a man, giant of a man as well. But Kilkenny Rugby Club recently became a Lions Club of Origin, which is a lovely thing to have as well, being recognised by the British and Irish Lions. It's such a big and historic institution. But it was great. You were commemorated on... Willie was commemorated, of course, on their website and everything. A lovely video put together as well. There was a lot of work went into that.
There was a lot of work into it. We became aware of the Lions Club of Origin, I'd say, this time last year. And I approached Willie Jr. to see if the family would mind us kind of applying for this. And because I think in Lions rugby, Willie has always been seen as an Ireland, Leinster and Black Rock man, you know, but I suppose his first club and he was an out-and-out Kilkenny man, was Kilkenny. And I approached Willie Jr. to see if the family would be interested in this, and he nearly bit the hand off us. So I went away to Lions Rugby and went through the application process with them, and they did their due diligence and went and checked, and so came back and said, yeah, actually he is a Kilkenny man. He's not a dub, contrary to what we thought. So Jesus, like, you know, we went through the whole process, and we met the media company back there in, I think it was November, and they interviewed the three lads: Dave Matthews, club president, Ger MacDonald, our director of rugby, and Willie Jr. And they went through the whole rigmarole. We sent them on a lot of stuff, and then there was a whole lot of cutting and editing that went on. But look, at the video was secondary to it. It's great for the Duggan family and for Kilkenny Rugby Club to get that, I suppose, that little bit of PR around it as well. But it's great to see Kilkenny Rugby Club, a rural club again, Southeast club, being recognised as the Lions Club, as a Lions Club of Origin. And it was pretty cool actually as well that the video of Willie Duggan was released 2 days after the Lions squad was released.
Yeah,
or was announced. So it was kind of a bit of an irony there as well. And I know I was chatting with Willie Jr. a couple of days later, and look, they were absolutely thrilled with it as well. But look, Duggan was just a man mountain, you know, and you know, for anyone who knew him, I got to know him reasonably well over the last few years, and for anyone who knew him, like he had a way about him, you know. You always knew where you stood with Duggan. Whether you liked it or not, or whether he liked you or not, you always knew where you stood with him. But I'm too young to remember him playing on the field, but I've seen a few videos. He was a non-compromising guy, but you know, behind it all, there was a desperately nice man there, and a man that lived and breathed Kilkenny, not just Kilkenny Rugby Club, but lived and breathed Kilkenny. He loved Kilkenny, was his place, like, you know, and he loved Kilkenny, and you know, he's an immense loss to the club, but you know, that's life. We just move on and we remember him. And you know, people at Kilkenny Rugby Club will tell you that our first team should be playing for Willie Duggan every day, you know, and they're probably right, you know, but you know, so be it. C'est la vie, as the lad says. Unfortunately, he's passed on, and you know, he, as I said, massive loss to the club, but his legacy lives on. And I think after that 77 Lions tour, the compliments that were paid to him by the All Blacks speaks volumes, you know, and I don't think anything else needs to be said about the man after that, you know.
Yeah, Ashley's name pops up in any conversation about rugby, and that he's remembered. That's how he's remembered. Huge character.
I think actually on St. Anthony Foley, he was the most capped Irish number 8 of all time, if I'm correct. I stand to be corrected.
You wouldn't be far wrong, yeah. Incredible.
You know, and what's more, after finishing with Ireland, he came back to play for Kilkenny, you know, so he did a couple of seasons with Kilkenny. And then he went from there into coaching, you know, and he always stayed involved. Like he had an immense influence on Kilkenny Rugby Club for 40, 50 years, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And just speaking of another death of Kilkenny man, Gary Halpen recently as well, another legend, Irish legend, and Leinster and a couple of other places as well, and another massive character. And of course, Mick Galway now living in Kilkenny. Him and Gary would have been good friends as well, but a huge loss to rugby as well.
A huge loss to rugby, and I think Gary's loss. I remember Gary around the early 90s up to the mid 90s with Ireland, but I never kind of was too young again really to kind of understand what he was or who he was. But it's only when he passed away that you actually realised how influential he was and how good a guy he was. Neil Francis, who usually hasn't a good word to say about anybody, spoke so highly of him. And, when Frano speaks well of somebody, you kind of go, geez, this guy must have been something special. London Irish, Harlequins, Leinster, an Olympian, an All-American hammer thrower. The man was just unbelievable. He went around the world. He captained London Irish. The great story about the announcement over the tannoy that there was a Volvo car blocking an emergency exit.
And he left
Gary strolled over to the sideline and asked the lads to go out and move his car. He was just a larger-than-life character. He became back involved with us about 3 or 4 years ago. He came in as our forwards coach. When he moved back to Kilkenny, he was he was a teacher over in Brecon College in Pembrokeshire in Wales. And when he moved back to Kilkenny, we approached him to see would he get involved. And he jumped at the opportunity because the Halpin family have been synonymous with Kilkenny Rugby Club for 60 years through his dad Tom before him, and then Gary, and then all of his brothers, his sister Beth Ann and Mark and John. They were synonymous with the club. So Gary jumped at the opportunity to get back. And I was actually training with the team the night he came back, and he actually spoke. It was immense pride the day he came back to step into Fookstown back onto the pitch to train us. And you could see it in him when he spoke. People listened, and there was. I remember he took a scrummage and training with us one night and was kind of going, well, this guy is a teacher. He's a teacher by the way he was speaking, what he was telling us to do. But for a guy who had been retired so long, the game, some might think the game had moved on, but he just brought it all back to such basics for us, telling lads what to do. That season, I don't think our scrum went back once, And then he stepped away for a year because he got the job in Rossgrey, or kind of Rossgrey was demanding a bit more out of him, and he stepped away for a year. But then Doc O'Connor managed to get him back involved for last season. And unfortunately then, just the way it turned out, the season came to a sudden stop before Gary could really get involved in us. And the next we had heard, he had tragically passed away. And I think the outpouring of sympathy and the stories that have come through since were incredible. Tough for the family and all of his friends and so forth, that they couldn't gather to kind of to respect him and give him the send-off a legend of his caliber deserved, But sometimes, as they say, it takes someone to pass on to understand how high esteem they're held.
Absolutely,
and, that man was incredible.
It was, and like you said, it was an awful pity that we couldn't pay our respects in person and all that. But you can imagine the party that would have happened. In non-COVID times, like Willie Duggan, the turnout for the players that came, the Kieran Fitzgeralds, the Brian O'Driscolls, all that stuff, it was incredible.
It was incredible. It was unbelievable. But actually, ironically, one of the best tributes I saw to Gary was from another Kilkenny man, that product of the club, Gabriel Fulcher, and Fulcher wrote a phenomenal tribute to him. He was a couple of years younger than him, but they were obviously very, very good friends, having played together in Leinster and again in London Irish. But for anyone who wants to see it, it's online there. It's on our club Facebook page. It was just incredible, and you could kind of get the sense from Gary that he was a man of knowledge. Like his interest in films, his interest in food, his interest in geography, everything was just incredible. And I think Gabriel really captured the man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. James, it's been great talking to you on the podcast. There's a huge amount going on. Of course, we have the Lions tour coming up to keep us occupied during the summer. At least it's a bit of rugby to watch in the Irish internationals. And then this podcast, of course, will focus more on the clubs. Then when action returns with the Southeast League, like you said, or the competitions earlier on in the season, then the Leinster League and the Towns Cup and all that as well. But is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, Stephen, look, that's good for now. Looking forward to working with you more in the future and getting the boys from Tullow and Carrow involved, hopefully, and we can have a bit of banter as we go on. And look, as I said to everyone, please feel free to come out to Fookstown and take up the game or try a bit of tag, or look, don't be a stranger.
Absolutely. James Blanchfield, Kilkenny Rugby Club PRO, and of course past player as well. Still plays a bit of tag, I presume, and running around with the whistle
in circles.
Yeah, absolutely. James Blanchfield, great talking to you. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Stephen. Take it easy.